Hi, friends. Um, I know we've heard a lot about the coronavirus, and the last thing I want to do is to contribute to a proliferation of garbage on social media about it. But I think I have a few things to say that might be fresh and new and that might be a benefit. So we'll go ahead and talk about it. And I'd like to talk to you about a few different ideas and use maybe a historical perspective that a lot of people um, don't consider or don't have the knowledge of at this time in our history. Uh, I want to talk to you, oddly enough, about the bubonic plague, or what was once called the Black Death, back in the Middle Ages. Now, that plague was a lot more lethal than what we're facing right now. Um, it was spread by rats, even though people thought it was in the air, and sort of witch doctors and other physicians came up with all kinds of elaborate potions and formulas to try to get rid of it. It was really spread by rats, and they got involved in getting into people's food and grain. And funny enough, I was camping, backpacking in Arizona, I don't know, 20 years ago or something, and a friend of mine that was backpacking with me in the Superstition Mountains told me that he had gotten the bubonic plague camping in Arizona. I didn't know that was still a thing, but between 1,000 and 3,000 people still get the bubonic plague every year. Of course, the difference between now and the Middle Ages is, number one, it doesn't spread as quickly because we know what causes it, and secondly, it can be cured with antibiotics now. But the bubonic plague had a huge social, economic, and political impact in the Middle Ages. And bear with me here for a minute. And I'll explain this, and then maybe we'll talk about what if anything it means for us now. So the way that politics worked in the Middle Ages and the way the economy worked was you have William the Conqueror in 1066 came in and conquered England, and he controlled it primarily with two methods. Number one, he compiled a thing called the Doomsday Book. And Doomsday means Day of Judgment. And it was essentially a survey of all the wealth in his realm, his new kingdom. It was everything down to the last cowhide was written in this book. And then it was actually presented to the king in a religious ceremony in which he was symbolically being presented with the entire kingdom. And so when he wanted to go fight a war, no matter what he wanted to do, if he needed wealth to do it, he knew where to go to find it. So that was the first thing. He realized that information was power. Secondly, he feuded out large tracts of land to people that were loyal to him, with strings attached. They had to do military service and they had to pay rents. Well, what do you think those people did? They maintained order within their little fiefdoms by doing the same thing. It was Super Amway. They feuded out tracts of land within their domains to people loyal to them with the same kinds of conditions. And it went on down. So it was, like I said, it was Super Amway. Everybody was supported by the people in their downline. The people at the bottom level, at the very bottom level, had no interest in the land. They were called serfs, and yet they were bound to the land. The person considered in direct possession of the land was called the demesne tenant. It's not important that you remember that word necessarily. But point being that people were very much tied to the land, and wealth was very much determined your place in society and where you were in that feudal ascension of people. So why didn't someone say that got a bad deal from their lord, or their lord would say, if you don't do what I ask you to, that's okay, you're free to do that, but I'll run you off the land and starve your children. Well, what stopped people then from just saying, well, I'm going to up sticks and go somewhere else to a lord that is more benevolent? Well, those situations weren't there to be had until what happened? The bubonic plague. The bubonic plague killed 60 million people in Europe. It took over half of the population of England. Over half. I mean, that is staggering if you think about it. In today's terms, that would be like England losing 30 million people. Of course, they didn't have that many then, but it was half of the people, and every family was affected by it. Every family was scarred by it. So it drastically changed the way people did things. Now, of course, no one would have wished for this to happen, but it did have a huge effect on the march forward to freedom in Europe, and especially in England. Why? Well, I'll tell you, the people that were most seriously affected by the bubonic plague were the laborers, the poorer class of people, the people who actually worked the land. And so when they were forced off their lands, or when many of them died, it was not so easy to force them off their lands. Because what happens when the supply of something diminishes? Well, the demand goes way up for what's left. You can see that with the scramble for toilet paper right now. Anyway, when the supply of labor fell, those who needed to employ people to work the land had to pay a lot more for it. They had to give people rights in the land that they may not have been willing to give up previously, because now the overlords that did not recognize the new economic reality of the time found themselves without a supply of willing workers to work the land for them. By the early 17th century, approximately 1/3 of the people in England were private freeholders, which is pretty huge if you think about it. So, I'm not saying the plague was a good thing, but I am saying that it had some positive effects. And that was, it killed a lot of the lower class, but the ones that were left with a lot more opportunity and wealth. Now, what can we learn about the coronavirus situation from what I've just told you about the Black Death? Do I think we're going to lose 60 million people in this situation? No, not at all. It might get worse than people think, but, we know a few things, and one is it's primarily, the people that are primarily dying for it are the much older people. And that isn't to diminish that. Every death is important. But, number one, this is a wake-up call, because we may have another plague like the bubonic plague that is super lethal and super contagious. So we've got to contemplate that. We've got to think about the very interconnected world that we live in, In the Middle Ages, the plague was spread by rats, but people who lived on the continent of Europe didn't spread that much beyond Europe because they didn't have airplanes and they couldn't travel clear across the world easily. People went in voyages on ships and it took months, to get anywhere in many cases. Today, transportation is a lot faster and cheaper by historical standards. And there's a lot of opportunity to spread viruses and diseases. So, number one, we've got to think about what is this teaching us if we ever do have a plague that is super lethal, much more lethal than COVID-19. And what does it teach us about how to live in isolation if we really have to for our very lives? Let's suppose there's a plague that's, more like Ebola or even worse, that's super lethal and super contagious. Because it's not a matter of if that's going to happen. It will happen someday. And COVID-19 is just an opportunity for us to figure out what we're going to do. Now, in terms of business, one thing we've had to figure out, and I'm finding my way on this right now too. I mean, my job being an attorney for your business, I got to be out pressing palms, right? I got to be out shaking hands and talking to people and meeting people and networking to try to find that new client. And right now, people resist that because of this situation we're in. And, we may get through this in a few months and people become comfortable going out again. I don't know to what extent this is going to change the world. I think the longer it goes on, the more it becomes the new normal. But regardless, like I said, we know this could happen again. And it could happen with a virus that's much more lethal. So we're realizing that we have to change. One way that we are changing is through technology. I mean, I've spent a lot of time in the last few days improving my online presence, letting people get to know me through events like this. Because if I can't be out networking and meeting you directly, then we've got to meet you some way. You've got to become comfortable with who I am, that I'm a smart guy, that I can handle your stuff. And then we've got to be able to meet through video chat and other ways if people aren't comfortable meeting in person. I'm in a profession where, I'm kind of different for a lawyer. I'm more entrepreneurial than most. But lawyers tend to be one of the most conservative, and I'm saying that with a small c because a lot of them are actually very politically liberal, but very conservative profession. And maybe that's because we follow precedent and we got the rule of stare decisis and all that. I don't know if that... But, I remember 15 years ago, I was trying to get law firms to give me contract work, briefing work. And I was telling them, look, you can do it cheaper because you don't have to pay my overhead. You just need to pay my hourly rate. And I can help you provide quality legal work for much cheaper. I mean, I got all this experience. My work's appeared in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, blah, blah, blah. Law firms, the answer typically to that was, it's just not something we've ever been willing to do. We just handle it in-house, and that's what we do. That's always what we've done. Well, if I look back on how law firms traditionally got started, one of the reasons you needed to have a law firm was you needed a big law library. And that could cost, $1 million. Well, your average law school graduate can't afford $1 million. Now you can have a better law library than they could buy for $1 million for $100 a month on LexisNexis or Westlaw or something like that. For $100, $200 a month, you can have a vast law library. Now, so, you don't necessarily need to cooperate with a bunch of other attorneys to provide the resources you need to have a credible law practice. And I've thought for a long time that law firms were going to eventually move more toward a loose association of professionals who cooperated for particular purposes when it was needed, to work on larger cases, or whatever the need might be. I still believe that, and I think I see the world headed that way. But when I was first thinking like that, you couldn't convince law firms to do it. Well, look at law firms today. A lot of people are having to work from home now because they don't want to be near other people. There's a lot of other kinds of considerations like that. Courts right now are closing down, and they're saying we're canceling all non-essential hearings, we're canceling all jury trials, until further notice. Well, I don't know how they're getting past the speedy trial provisions, if they're just going to let criminals go free or what they're going to do. I guess my point here is courts should have been ready for this. Now, I understand that in most situations it'd be hard to go to trial remotely. I mean, it could be done, but it'd be hard. I mean, you've got exhibits that have to be passed around. You've got witnesses. You want to look in the eyes of your witnesses. You want the jury to see them talk in a way that would be harder, to do by video camera. Having said that, a motion hearing, like for a motion for summary judgment or other technical motions that, discovery motions and things like that, you could easily conduct those hearings by video conference. And then the attorneys wouldn't have to bill their client for time that they drive to the courthouse to answer a few questions from the judge. That, they wouldn't have to go through the inconvenience of parking. And why do we do that in this day and age? Well, we do it because it's a ritual. It's what we've always done. We've always gone to the courthouse, and we've sat down, we've crossed past the bar and sat up at the desk, and we've, paid homage to the judge sitting high above all the rest of us in the courtroom. Well, I mean, I'm a traditionalist too, I get that. But for a minor motion hearing, really, we ought to be doing those now by video conference, whether there's a virus out there or not, because it's efficient. Do you know the average district court judge in the state of Utah has 600 active cases on his docket or her docket? 600. Okay, sometimes the judge doesn't remember from one hearing to the next what was going on in the case the last time the attorneys and the judge and the parties all met together. There's a lot of efficiencies we could create by making hearings shorter. It'd be easier to cut them off and take less time on them if people hadn't gone to great lengths to get there to the courthouse. And really, there's no need to have a hearing take a great deal of time in the transition, to shut down their office, to go get in the car, to drive to the courthouse, to park, to get there, to wait for all of the other hearings that are occurring before the one that you're there for. If you don't have witnesses to put on, why can't we just argue motions like that? Well, I'm going on too long about that. But the point is, in every industry there are efficiencies we can create through technology. In the last few days, I've met with several people by video chat. Is that as good as meeting with them, face-to-face over lunch or something? Yeah, probably not. But when you consider the efficiencies, if I've got to drive from my office, say, to downtown Salt Lake City to meet with a client or a potential client or a strategic partner, that's going to take an extra hour out of my day. Whereas how long does it take me to log on to a video chat? A couple of minutes. And the more we do it, the better we'll be at it. So those are the kinds of efficiencies that I'm talking about. Who knows um, how the world is going to adapt, we're going to consider things that we just in the past haven't been willing to consider. Like maybe we'll have a face-to-face networking meeting with someone over video chat. Maybe we'll hire an attorney to do a project for our business that we've never met in person. Maybe we'll hire a photographer to take pictures for us that stays 10 feet away from us and will never have come more than 10 feet close to us, because we don't want to be exposed to this. And we'll find out that it works just fine, that we get just as good of pictures. I mean, if we go down the list of ways we can adapt to this, we might find it's going to create efficiencies that we hadn't been willing to consider before because it's just not the way things have been done in the past. And maybe we're going to find out that there are opportunities, kind of like after the plague in the Middle Ages, society adapted, and for those who kind of got and understood that the world had changed, there was greater opportunity. There were more, the people who understood how the world had changed benefited. And so I'm suggesting in this situation, we take stock. What efficiencies have been created by technology that we can take advantage of, but we haven't because it's just not something we've been willing to do or consider. What are the ways that we can interact without having to leave the comfort of our office? And what kind of efficiencies can that create? Could you interview 10 candidates for a job, for example, at your company without having to have them all come in or take a plane or whatever to come in and meet in person? Could you interview them just about as well over a video conference? A lot of people haven't been willing to consider that, but they're doing it now. Many are doing it now when they have positions to fill. Are there people who could work from their own basement rather than having to provide an office, a desk, a computer, and all of the other overhead that goes with setting up a new employee? Are there relationships you could set up with outsource personnel that are more efficient, that are more convenient for the worker that you're seeking, that allow you to get the services of that worker for a cheaper price and allow them to keep more of what you're paying them because their overhead is their own responsibility? There's so many possible things that we can think about now, that it's I think this is the way the world was going anyway, but this virus is forcing us to confront some of the issues. As I mentioned a little earlier in this cast, I am convinced that there's going to come a time, I don't know if it'll be in my lifetime or, 50 years from now, but at some point, with how interconnected the world is, there's going to be another virus with the potential to wipe out humanity or wipe out huge portions of it, the way the bubonic plague did during the Middle Ages. And this virus caught a lot of us off guard, me off guard. And I know a lot of us it caught off guard. And there's people like, how am I going to make a living now? Well, we've got to think about how to adapt. And like I said, part of the reason for that is there is going to come a time when we're going to have to be quarantined to our homes for a long period of time because of a lethal virus, a very lethal virus of some sort. And we've got to figure out how to keep life going despite that. And this is a good wake-up call for us to have that conversation about how we're going to do it. One final thought on this, and then I'll let you go. This may be the most important thing I say in the current situation. It's really important for us to not get so caught up in thinking about this virus and talking about it and watching the news about it that we forget that life has to go on. People have to work. People have to provide for their families. Businesses have to continue. And not everyone has the luxury of hunkering down in their house and just riding this out or waiting this out. Mortgages are going to have to be paid. Bills are going to have to be paid. And there's a lot of people I know that would hire someone like me, or I mentioned photographers, because I have a couple friends that are photographers that are getting no work right now. I know realtors and home appraisers that people are just waiting to make decisions about buying or selling homes and things like that until this is all over. Well, there's a lot of people that are just waiting until life gets back to normal to do any business. I think that's a monumental mistake. Be safe, follow the precautions that we've been asked to follow, but figure out how to keep life going. If it's your plan to sell your house and move, don't hold off until this is over and there's a glut of homes on the market and you're forced to take less for yours. Don't wait until this is over to advertise your business and try to find a way to do some business, even if it's remote or online. Let's keep life going. Let's get creative. Let's be inventive. Let's be entrepreneurial. And let's succeed through this. And I think those who recognize the new economic realities of the day are going to be like the people that survived the bubonic plague and came out of it on the other end and had the savvy to understand that the world had changed, that the rules were different. And I want to see us do the same thing, me and all the people I care about. That includes many of you. So keep your chin up. Let's be optimistic. Let's figure out how the world has changed, and let's get through this and succeed together. All right? Thanks for listening.